5.2.
It's 5:30. I'm in bed in my house in Westport, Connecticut, and the alarm just went off. 10 minutes later, I've taken a shower, and I'm trying to eat a cup of yogurt with granola. I'm not that hungry, but I have to eat something. I feed my dog, and I'll be leaving for work in 20 minutes. I ride a bicycle to the commuter bus station, and it takes around 15 minutes. It's now 6:30, and I'm about to get on the commuter bus to the train station. I just caught it, which was a relief because I need to be on time today. I'm meeting a client at 8:45. It's due to arrive at Westport train station in about 30 minutes, depending on the traffic. I get to the Westport train station in time, thank the leg of Mike's. My train leaves at 7:15. It's now 7:15, and I just caught the train, which takes me to Grand Central Station. It's an hour ride, the longest leg of my commute. The train arrived at Grand Central Station in time today, so now I just take a 15-minute walk, and then I'll be there. I desperately need some coffee.
.3. 1.
I'll be leaving for work in 20 minutes.
2.
I'm about to get on the commuter bus to the train station.
3.
My train leaves at 7:15.
4.
It's due to arrive at Westport train station in about 30 minutes, depending on the traffic.
5.
I need to be on time today. I'm meeting a client at 8:45.
5.4. Part 1.
I was in Warsaw, in Poland, for a week because I had rehearsals and a concert there. But on the Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday of that week, I also had to do rehearsals in Berlin.
Oh.
I needed to be able to have the rehearsal in Warsaw in the morning, then fly to Berlin for the rehearsal there in the late afternoon, and then straight back to Warsaw late at night in time for the next morning rehearsal.
Oh.
The only way to get to Berlin and back in time was to fly, so I hired an air taxi.
Oh.
As soon as I left the rehearsal, there was a car waiting to take me to the airport. And when I arrived at the airport, my heart sank because the weather was not so good.
Oh.
And the operations manager said, "Look, I'm terribly sorry. We can't fly at the moment because of the weather." Finally, the weather cleared and they said we could fly. So I was still hoping to make it in time for my rehearsal. However, we got into the plane and I didn't have a very good impression of it. It looked a bit old.
Oh.
There was a little hole where the air was coming through where the door had been shut on my side.
Oh, no.
5.5. Part 2.
I thought, well, never mind, and I put on my seatbelt, and finally we took off. The weather was not good, and after about 5 or 10 minutes, I was terribly cold. And I thought, well, I know it can be cold, and it was also very noisy. Normally they give you headphones, but for some reason they didn't. So the noise was very loud, and it got very, very cold.
Oh.
And then, to my horror, I realized that the co-pilot's door wasn't shut properly. By this point, the co-pilot himself had realized that the door wasn't shut. So he turned to me and said, "Problema." And then he started gesticulating to the pilot, who was already having difficulties because the weather was very bad and it was raining very hard and there was a bit of a storm. I was feeling extremely uncomfortable by now, wishing that I was on the ground. But then came the real drama, because the pilot was trying to indicate to the co-pilot how to shut the door properly. Now, what do you do if you're driving a car and you realise that you haven't shut the door properly? You usually stop, open the door again, and then shut it with a bang, or sometimes you don't even stop. You just, while you're driving slowly, you do that. Anyway, this idiotic co-pilot, he proceeded to do precisely that. He then opened the door completely in order to shut it properly, and I was just behind them, as this is a small plane, so right in front of me was just open air. This open door. I was absolutely terrified, cold air rushing in, and then he tried to shut it properly, but presumably because of the pressure or the cold, I don't know what, he couldn't do so. And had he not had his seatbelt on, he would have fallen out of the plane. So he was holding on, partly for dear life, partly to try and shut it, unsuccessfully. The pilot was shouting at him, but he couldn't correct the situation because, you know, he had to keep the plane in the air, which was now extremely precarious, and the plane was going up and down.
5.6. Part 3.
Then suddenly I felt that we were going right down, and I prayed that we were going to land. To my relief, we landed in one piece, so at least my life was no longer in danger. But as far as the rehearsal was concerned, I realized with horror that because of this emergency in the air, the pilot had had to land at the nearest town, which was still quite a long way from Berlin. I had to phone the rehearsal people to say I was going to be late, and I was feeling thoroughly miserable. However, we eventually took off and arrived in Berlin, and I did my rehearsal, and fortunately it had been the type of rehearsal where my lateness had not caused a real problem. Then on the way back, the pilots were waiting for me at the airport. This was now about 10 o'clock at night or 9:30. So this time we took off, and I said, "Are you quite sure the door is properly shut? Quite sure?" And they said, "Yes, yes." And I said, "We're very late now. I want you to get back to Warsaw as fast as possible." And they said, "Yes, the wind is in our favour. We land. This aircraft can go very fast. We should be back soon in Warsaw. Don't worry, everything will go fine." So we took off, and things were, well, nothing was going particularly wrong, but I noticed that they were going rather slowly, but it was still so noisy that I couldn't communicate with them and ask, "Why are you going so slowly?" Eventually, when we landed, I said, "Why were you going so slowly? I told you to go as fast as possible." And the pilot said, "I'm terribly sorry. I didn't know this plane very well, and we were having a fuel problem, so we're running out of fuel." So on the way there, I'd nearly fallen to the ground through an open door, and now we'd been in danger of falling to the ground because of lack of fuel.
5.8.
Welcome to the Travel Show. Today we'll be examining the debate about whether there should be a ban on climbing Uluru, also known as Ayers Rock in Australia. To the Anangu people, it's a sacred rock which shouldn't be climbed. To others, Uluru is a giant red landmark calling out for exploration. But figures this week show a decline in the number of people climbing the structure, heating up the debate about whether it's time for a total ban. While visitors aren't prohibited from climbing the 1,142-foot high rock, they are asked not to out of respect for the Aborigines, who jointly run the national park where Uluru is located with the Australian government. Uluru's traditional owners ask visitors not to climb for cultural, environmental, and safety reasons. 36 people have died attempting the climb since 1958. Here, we get the views of a tour operator who says Uluru shouldn't be climbed, and an Australian journalist who has climbed the rock. First, we'll hear from tour operator Robert Cowan, who says Uluru shouldn't be climbed.
The type of people who climb Uluru are the sort who fly directly into Uluru Airport. They stay at five-star resorts at the base of the rock, and all they want to do is go up the rock. As a tour operator, we have a different attitude. We have a responsibility to respect the traditional owners of Uluru, the Anangu people. That means explaining that they ask that you don't climb their rock because it is sacred to them. Therefore, we don't promote the climb on our brochures or website. We actually promote the non-climb of Uluru, which is respecting the traditional owner's requests. Our guides spend the first of our tour explaining to people why it is culturally insensitive to climb the rock. That's why we take guests to visit the Aboriginal Cultural Centre and we show them examples of Anangu rock art. The rock art tells the story of the beginnings of Uluru and why it is a sacred site to the Aboriginal people. There are signs everywhere saying, "Not to climb." That's our view of it. And if a ban on climbing Uluru is enforced, it won't make a difference to us, but it will have an impact on the higher-end market. The owners of our company have never climbed Uluru, neither have our tour guides. and we hope that our passengers will respectfully not climb the rock.
And now we'll hear from journalist Dominic Hughes, who has climbed Uluru.
My friend and I had the debate about whether to climb or not to climb the rock when we arrived at Uluru a few years back. We'd visited the cultural centre and heard all the stories about the rock and why it was sacred to the Aboriginal people. My friend, who is not a religious person, suddenly became unusually spiritual and suggested perhaps we shouldn't climb it. It is a pattern I've seen over and over again. People who have no time for traditional religious beliefs of any kind can become oddly respectful when it comes to the beliefs of an ancient tribe or culture. But we have to respect the beliefs of others, you say. No, we don't. We have to respect the rights of others to believe whatever they want, and they have to respect our right to regard their beliefs as invented stories. I have no problem with people who say, this is sacred to me, so I choose not to do this. I do have a problem with people who say, this is sacred to me, so you can't do this. That attitude, my friends, can be dangerous. Right now, you're probably doing things that don't conform to other people's beliefs. Eating meat, working on the Sabbath, driving a car, drinking alcohol. The list is long. I like that I live in a country where I'm free to choose to believe in whichever of these things I want, and free to ignore them all too. I don't see how Uluru and the mythology that surrounds it are any different. Trying to follow everybody's beliefs is a recipe for a dull life. My friend agreed, and up we went. Climb it or don't climb it, it's your choice, and I like having choices. I've no regrets about this one.
So what do you say? Should climbing Uluru be banned? Let us know.
5.9.
Do you like dogs?
No, I don't. But my husband does.
So does mine. We have 3 German Shepherds.
I took a cruise to Alaska last summer.
Lucky you. I'd love to do that. Did you see any whales?
No, I wanted to, but I got seasick, and I mostly stayed in my cabin.
Allie doesn't have any pets, does she?
She does have a pet. She has a hamster.
Ugh, I don't like hamsters.
Neither do I. They're too much like mice.
5.10.
Woodpeckers play an important role in controlling insect pests, yet they can be pests themselves when they cause structural damage to buildings and create disturbing noises. Woodpeckers are a protected species and by law cannot be harmed, despite the trouble they can cause homeowners. Louisa Hobson was such a homeowner. So, Louisa, tell us what happened.
Well, I was out of town in the spring, traveling on business, and I don't know if this started while I was away, but as soon as I got home, the first morning, I was awoken very early by this pecking sound, and I could tell it was a woodpecker.
Mm-hmm.
It was so loud that I knew it couldn't have been pecking on normal wood. So I got up and looked for the source, but I couldn't find it at first. And after a few days, I discovered this woodpecker was pecking at my neighbor's drainage pipe.
And this was a metal pipe outdoors?
Right. And he would do this starting at 5 in the morning and continue for hours. And even though I'm not usually home in the morning, we could hear him on weekends, throughout the morning. He was just focused on this one metal pipe.
So what did you do at first?
Well, I spoke to the neighbor who didn't really know what to do. So then I decided to go on Facebook and send out a plea asking if anyone knew how to kill a woodpecker.
Aha. And the response?
Oh, a lot of people were horrified that I would even think about hurting such a beautiful creature as a woodpecker.
Sure.
I got some very angry messages. Then I realized it might sound bad to someone who's not living through it. But when you're being woken up at 5 o'clock every morning, you start to go a little bit crazy.
Uh-huh.
You feel like it's an awful pest that you've just got to get rid of.
And did you know at the time that woodpeckers are a protected species?
I didn't know that, so it's a good thing I didn't actually try to kill it.
Did you receive any helpful suggestions?
Yes, actually, a friend suggested getting a fake owl.
Ah.
I always thought they were just bad decorations, but I discussed it with my neighbor, and he was willing to try it. So we got this plastic owl, and my neighbor affixed it to the outside wall, but it didn't help. I But then he moved the owl closer to where the bird was, and after that, we never saw the woodpecker again.
So the owl really did work, and there was a happy ending.
Yes, thank goodness. But I tell you, I'm not a violent person, but I was ready to kill that woodpecker. It was driving me nuts.
5.11.
Did you know that tens of thousands of Burmese pythons live in Florida's Everglades? The story of how they got there is remarkable. In August 1992, Hurricane Andrew, a Category 5 hurricane, hit southern Florida hard. The immediate damages were obvious. It caused devastation in the area and claimed 40 lives. But no one imagined the storm's most frightening consequence, which would not become apparent for years. When Hurricane Andrew hit, an exotic pet dealer's animal warehouse was destroyed. Giant python snakes, native to Southeast Asia, were being kept in the warehouse, and many of the 900 Burmese python snakes living there found their way into the Florida Everglades. Right now, thousands of these Burmese pythons are on the loose in the wetlands of Florida. Their population is growing, and officials fear they could eventually spread into other states. Wildlife experts are worried. The snake's size and power pose a huge threat to native animals and endangered species. Small animals like rabbits have disappeared from the Everglades thanks to the pythons, who just swallow up the smaller animals. The number of other mammals, such as opossums and raccoons, have dropped by more than 98%. An expert animal handler says,
"These pythons are massive. Recently, a college student captured an 18-foot, 8-inch Burmese python. He was lucky that it didn't kill him. The problem is that despite their size, they are not easy to catch. They hide in the waters, and they are quick. If a python finds you before you find it, it tracks you with its tongue, and when it attacks, it will bite deep and hard."
Pythons have even been known to swallow deer and even alligators. And while attacks on humans are extremely rare, Burmese pythons can pose a danger to people. The actual number of Burmese pythons in the Everglades is unclear. Estimates range from 10,000 up to 150,000. In order to control the increasing population, Florida wildlife officials have issued permits to reptile experts to hunt and kill the pythons. They hope this will prevent them from migrating to other areas. If you're not a reptile expert, the best thing to do is to stay away from one.
5.12. 1.
Now that's something I feel very strongly about.
2.
Well, I don't feel particularly strongly about it either way.
3.
I have to say, I am completely against zoos nowadays.
4.
Oh no, I totally disagree with you there.
5.
Well, I couldn't disagree with you more.
6.
Well, I don't entirely agree with you.
7.
Well, I'm absolutely convinced that the animal does not want to be there.
8.
Well, I'm pretty sure that kids could get the same amount of pleasure from seeing animals in the wild.
5.13. Song. Talking Bird.
Oh, my talking bird, though you know so few words, they're on infinite repeat, like your brain can't keep up with your beat. And you're kept in an open cage, so you're free to leave or stay. Sometimes you get confused, like there is a hint I'm trying to give you. The longer you think, the less you know what to do. It's hard to see your way out when you live in a house, 'cause you don't realize that the window open the whole time. Oh, my talking bird, though your feathers are tattered and furled, I'll love you all your days, till the breath leaves your delicate frame. It's all here for you, as long as you choose to stay. It's all here for you, as long as you don't fly away.
Five point 14.
Baked, chopped, mashed, minced, sliced, stuffed, whipped, boiled, grilled, peeled, scrambled, steamed, stir-fried, grated, melted, toasted.
5.15.
Baked apples. Boiled eggs. Peeled oranges. Scrambled eggs. Sliced onions. Steamed asparagus. Stuffed eggplant. Toasted almonds.
5.16.
Chopped tomatoes, stir-fried tofu, grilled tuna,